saying it comes as a pregnant woman and her child have died. They were at that Mariupol maternity ward that was bombed, and that woman on the stretcher, she was injured in the abdomen, hip was dislocated. She was holding her stomach where her baby was. That baby did not survive. The medics who treated her told the AP that she told them to, quote, kill me now, when she realized she was losing her baby. And she did not survive that birth either. It is an incredibly tragic thing to even think about. And after photos were released of her and others at that maternity ward who were so visibly injured by the bombing, the Russian government claimed that the photos were staged. They said that the women were actors. One of the women has since given birth, and she has survived. She has a baby girl named Veronica, debunking the lies of the Russian government. And out front now is Alex Wade. He is the emergency coordinator in Ukraine for Doctors Without Borders. And Alex, thanks so much for your taking the time here amidst all of the work that you're doing. You know, we knew that 3 people had died in that attack on the maternity ward at the hospital in Mariupol, and now we're learning of more deaths. One of the women and her child, as a result of the attack, was dead when they delivered the baby. What has your organization learned about the extent of this attack at this point?
So unfortunately, we know a lot less than we would like, because we lost contact with the hospital over a week ago when comms started going down in Mariupol.
I know that the death toll in Mariupol is frankly unknown, right? And we have heard people talking about walking down the street, and there are people who have died, and they're on the street. They're not obviously able to move them. They're not able to identify some of them. We are hearing, obviously, about mass grave situations, that there are trenches literally being built where people are wrapping bodies in anything they can, whether it be a bag or a carpet, anything to try to wrap those bodies. Have you heard anything more about this?
Yes, we have staff, MSF colleagues of ours who are still there. One of our colleagues informed us he's seen his neighbors burying the dead bodies of their neighbors. So they're in a situation where their choice is, the only thing worse than burying my dead neighbor's body is not burying my dead neighbor's body and leaving it on the street. People don't have access to water and food, which has run out for over a week now. We also know that people have already started dying who were part of vulnerable populations that had pre-existing conditions, chronic diseases, conditions in which they needed continual access to medical care. That care was cut off. And members of this group have started dying already. And now what we'll start to see very soon is people in large numbers dying of dehydration and hunger if some help is not provided, both allowing safe passage to leave and also safe passage in to bring medical supplies, food, and water to the population that will remain in Mariupol.
So, I mean, it is truly impossible to comprehend this, the scale of this suffering, this needless suffering. Alex, when you say the vulnerable populations, you know, I spoke to someone the other day whose grandparents were there, and part of the reason that they had stayed was in part because of what you mentioned, the speed with which this accelerated, but also because they had underlying medical conditions, diabetes in this case, right, needed regular care. So the last time they had spoken to them was a week and a half ago before these communications went down, and already the medicine had run out. So I would presume you're talking about populations like that, where people had, whether it be diabetes or dialysis needs or whatever it might have been. That's where you're now starting to see more death?
Exactly, 100%. People, you have, beyond the direct causes of conflict, so the people who've been injured and died from shelling within the city, you have all of the emergency needs that every population on the earth has. You have people who need access to insulin, people who need access to hemodialysis. You have pregnant women who need access to safe deliveries and who could have complicated pregnancies, need access to surgical services. You have people with serious mental health conditions that need access to mental health services. And these are all conditions where if access is interrupted, the condition can deteriorate very, very quickly, leading to serious complications or death. And we are now starting to hear from our colleagues who are still there that people have died from lack of access to their treatments. We know even outside of Mariupol, there's a huge demand for insulin because it's not only Mariupol, supply chains throughout the country have been disrupted. So there's hospitals all over the country that are worried about their supply. And this is at a time where their needs are increasing because they're receiving more patients than they usually would. And so we can be certain that supplies for things like for certain conditions in Mariupol have run out, and the population is now paying the price for that.
So when President Zelensky's advisor has put the death toll in Mariupol at more than 2,500 people, it sounds like from what you're saying that that actually is tragically going to be a fraction of what the real number is.
You know, I don't want to speculate on that yet, but you don't have to be a doctor to figure out that if you have a population of somewhere between 300,000 to 400,000 people who don't have access to water or food for over a week now, the results will be pretty disastrous.
All right, Alex, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
It's important to have confidence.
Built for you.
And many people had to be rescued. At Dunham Park, the floods washed away the walking bridge. The Satormo Park Bridge was also destroyed. However, now we're dealing with a drought and fire danger.
Meteorologist Scott Munch shows us just how dry we are.
Today will be the coldest day for at least a week. Dry conditions and warm temperatures will soon return, and they'll start to take their toll. As we go through this week, the combination of low humidity, above average temperatures, and any wind will create critical fire conditions. All three are looking likely as we go through the rest of the work week. Western South Dakota will have to be monitored closely as this is an area that is in widespread drought. Granted, you don't expect to get out of the drought in the winter months, but the lack of snow cover and the expected dry and warm conditions will continue to take their toll on western Kettleland. But western South Dakota isn't the only area with fire concerns. Earlier this month, the Yankton Fire Department reported a controlled burn spread out of control over pasture land along Highway 81. And a garbage pile burn also got out of control, resulting in farm equipment getting damaged. The outlook for any precipitation isn't looking good, but we are looking at least a chance to bring in some rain or snow early next week. For Kettleland Weather, I'm meteorologist Scott Munch.
Stay with us. Jay's back with another check on your evening forecast right after the break.
These babies may be tiny.
Come on.
It'll be coming in from the south.
Don't want to risk getting cut off from the international financial system. But of course, the Chinese can find creative ways to circumvent sanctions. They have done so with North Korea and with Iran. For example, the Chinese could let Russia's central bank cash in on some of the $140 billion that it holds in Chinese bonds. It could use its policy banks to provide loans directly to Russian enterprises instead of going through Russian banks. But at the end of the day, I think China will be careful. It does not want to suffer secondary sanctions from the United States.
So, Bonnie, as we mentioned, all this happens amid that high-level meeting in Rome. We should mention it was previously scheduled as well as a follow-up to the virtual meeting between Presidents Biden and Leader Xi. But, you know, they did say that there's an importance of maintaining open lines of communication here. I guess from your perspective, what is the best-case scenario for the U.S. coming out of that meeting with China?
Well, the best case scenario, I think, is that there's some understanding between the United States and China about how to address some very high priority security issues. Ukraine, number one. Another one is North Korea, which reportedly may be firing off an ICBM in the coming months. There are many issues between the United States and China that need to be dealt with. And so what we need to have is sustained dialogue with China with some very clear pathways forward about how to address some of these issues. And to do that, we need to build more mutual trust in the relationship. That is very, very difficult at this point. Xi Jinping views the United States as a country in decline. It sees Western democracies as having failed. and it has aligned, Xi Jinping has aligned himself very closely with Putin and with Russia. And so I think that this is going to be very difficult for the U.S. and China to find ways to work together to address these issues.
So treasures with his class.
And then when you opened up the bag, what did you find?
Money. The face mask with all their names on. The letter. Oh yeah, the leaves.
Tell me what some of the classmates said.
Oh my goodness, $1.
A new kind of message in a bottle. Savannah Sellers, NBC News.
What a terrific little story. That's Nightly News for this Monday. Thank you for watching. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
You're a killer. Nothing with you is random. She's getting intel from all over.
FBI! Sir, don't move!
Starting with tomorrow, we'll see partly to mostly sunny skies, 62 in Sioux Falls with a south breeze, 60 in Aberdeen, 65 in Pierre, 65 in Rapid City. We'll be right around 60 degrees on Wednesday, then just only slightly cooler. We're still talking the 50s for St. Pat's Day. That's our time. Thank you for watching.
Enjoy the evening, everyone.
Dealer.
We still have a mix of sun and clouds in the Sioux Falls area right now, but those clouds will be clearing out later tonight. We're in the low 40s at the moment. We'll be falling back to the upper 20s by midnight, and the wind will be getting a lot lighter as well. In Aberdeen, it's in the low 40s for you. We'll drop off to the 30s later on tonight. Cloud cover clearing out for you as well. Wind remaining out of the south. And in Pierre, some extra clouds, but you are at 50 degrees and not getting too cold tonight. We'll only be falling back to the mid-30s by midnight. It's going to be a lot warmer tomorrow. We'll talk about that coming up.
Russia widens its attack on Ukraine as peace talks are suspended until tomorrow. The latest from Washington coming up.
But first, things have settled down in Pierre after the 2022 legislative session came to a close last week. But there's still some questions that need to be answered. We will take a closer look at those, as well as more stories coming up on Dakota News Now at 6:30.
This is Dakota News Now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Wright.
I'm Andrea Anderson. The main run of the South Dakota legislative session has wrapped up, with only veto day still outstanding. Several with substantial long-term effects bills managed to get across the finish line this year.
But some lawmakers wonder if that's enough for constituents. State House reporter Austin Goss taking a closer look back in Pierre.
South Dakota lawmakers have returned home after the main run of the 2022 legislative session. And once again, one of the main focus points was on money. Largely made up of federal coronavirus relief dollars, ended up going mostly towards major projects to help the development of South Dakota in one way or another. A few examples include helping to build a cybersecurity school for Dakota State University, upgrades to the Music Museum in Vermilion, and other sorts of similar improvement projects. But what may be the most impactful for South Dakotans is what didn't get passed. Efforts to pass a sales tax, grocery tax, and property tax cut fell short. Opponents argued that substantial tax cuts could be irresponsible with an uncertain economic future. But proponents argued that was exactly the reason to get them done this year.
Those are areas where instead of doing different carve-outs, you could look at specific things you could do to not have those taxes, not have that increased burden South Dakota families.
As of Monday, the governor had signed 128 bills and still has 121 to consider. Veto day is on March 28th. In Pierre, Austin Goss, Dakota News Now.
Turning things over now to the First Alert Weather Center, and it's been a while since we've seen the sun out at 6:30.
Yeah, Tyler, how about, I guess, we're losing the hour, but getting some sunlight, so that's okay.
Yeah, sunset at 7:30 now in the Sioux Falls area, and you know, it was a little bit cooler today compared to yesterday, but overall not bad at all. You know, last week we were stuck in those 20s and 30s. A lot better today, but again, we were a little bit cooler by comparison. and especially in northeastern South Dakota. Here were the high temperatures today, and the reason why it was a little bit cooler in the northeastern part of the state is because we did have some snowfall that took place late last night and very early this morning. So I kept your temperature in Sisseton down to 32, but elsewhere we got to the 40s and 50s for today. Some high thin clouds building in on First Alert Live Doppler radar. They'll be clearing out later on tonight as well, so that's going to reveal some more sunshine for Tuesday. We're still in those 40s and 50s at the moment, and we've now cooled down to 30 in Sisseton. The next big thing will show that we are really going to be warming up tomorrow, starting out our Tuesday morning in the upper 20s and a few low 30s, but then we're back in the 60s for highs just about everywhere. We'll talk about how long that sticks around coming up in just a few minutes, Sam.
Tyler, thank you. A Sioux Falls man behind bars on various sex crimes against a teenager. Police say Elaine Capeo was arrested Friday afternoon. According to police, a 14-year-old girl was sitting inside a business when Capea sat next to her. He allegedly grabbed her phone and saw her social media handles. Police say Capea began to send her messages, including pictures of himself exposed, indicating he wanted to meet later. The victim used her phone to write a message that she needed help and showed it to someone else in the lobby. That person called police. Capea facing several charges, including sexual contact with a child less than 16. Police say the two did not know each other before the incident. A Sioux Falls man is facing charges after police say he assaulted an officer. This happened yesterday afternoon in central Sioux Falls. Police responding to a report of a man either asleep or passed out. When the officers tried to wake the man, she was attacked. Police say the suspect grabbed the officer's hair and the gun belt before putting her in a chokehold. Other officers arriving on scene were able to pull the suspect off and arrested him. Ryan Boker now facing several charges, including aggravated assault and resisting arrest. The Russian assault on Ukraine has broadened, with fresh attacks striking in the west near the Polish border as Ukrainians try desperately to escape with their lives. The U.S. says Russia, too, could be growing desperate for military and economic aid from China.
Back home, the ripple effects of war continue to hit American wallets at gas pumps and checkout lines. NBC's Alice Barr reports tonight from Washington.
Today in Ukraine, little progress in peace talks amid rapidly expanding acts of war. Russian-launched airstrikes over the weekend, killing at least 35 at a military base in western Ukraine and landing just 20 miles from the Polish border at the doorstep of NATO territory the Biden administration has vowed to defend.
President Putin must stop the violence, de-escalate, and choose the path of diplomacy.
And with concerns growing about a Russia-China alliance, both countries now pushing back against reports that Russia has asked China for military equipment and other support.
If they think that they can basically bail Russia out, they can give Russia a workaround to the sanctions that we've imposed, they should have another thing coming.
The U.S. working to get an additional $200 million in military equipment to frontline Ukrainian forces, as Russia appears to be firing more indiscriminately at civilian targets, increasing the desperation and the will to fight back. The port city of Odessa preparing for an attack by sea.
Different ages, different languages, different cultures, all prepared to fight for Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy pushing Western leaders for more aggressive action. He's now set to address the U.S. Congress on Wednesday. Lawmakers and President Biden balancing pressure on the home front as the war adds to soaring inflation, driving grocery store sticker shock and forcing fuel prices to record highs. Multiple sources tell NBC News the White House is discussing having President Biden travel to Europe in the coming weeks for a trip with a focus on the war in Ukraine and reassuring allies in the region. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Meantime, gas prices dropped slightly over the weekend. The national average for a gallon of gas currently sits at $4.31. In South Dakota, gas also saw a drop to $3.93 a gallon. At this point, gas prices are up $1.50 from last year. Many people observe Lent in the weeks leading up to Easter, but regardless of whether you observe or not, Fish fries have become incredibly popular in the Midwest. One Sioux Falls restaurant is taking advantage by adding several fish items to their menu for a limited time. Cmgus Garage in Sioux Falls is known for its variety of burgers and drinks. This spring, Cmgus is doing something a little bit different. In addition to those burgers, the restaurant is now adding Lent-friendly items to their menu for a limited time.
It's just, trying to make sure we are doing the culture Lent, obviously, and then having that extra taste in there as well. Having some extra fish products, trying out something new, seeing if people like it. Maybe we can add it to the real menu or maybe not. Just having a different option for people.
Cmgus hopes to continue bringing in new items like fried fish to their menu so that there's something for everyone to eat at the restaurant. More information on this limited time menu can be found on the Dakota News Now app and website. Pfizer says they will not be stopping the sale of medication to Russia, but their alternative cannot make the Russian government very happy. We'll tell you why in about 15 minutes. Tyler.
Andrea, warmer temperatures are on the way for our Tuesday, much warmer than today. We'll talk about how long they stick around coming up in your First Alert forecast.
Bright orange statues sweeping the National Mall this month to honor women in STEM. More on these local heroes in their DC debut.
Only one station offers over 6 hours of news daily. At noon.
Didn't know anyone who died of COVID, and as I said, that those deaths were, clustered among some of the most vulnerable groups of people. And I do think, yes, that absolutely has contributed to, some of the counter narratives. It's easier to contest the significance of the crisis when so many people, especially people in positions of power, have been untouched by it.
We are seeing now across Europe, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, Omicron is now taking off again in vaccinated populations and unvaccinated populations. It certainly, to your point, it seems like we are nowhere near really being done with this.
I agree. I think that certainly COVID is not done with us, and our decision to be done with it, it puts us on a path towards even more preventable deaths in the future. The CDC recently changed its guidelines for COVID, but if you sort of calculate based on those guidelines what level of death we would accept, it's sort of baked in that we would sort of tolerate around 1,000 deaths per day across the country. That is a lot of extra mortality. That's a lot of families who are going to lose people because we, our leaders have collectively decided that this is what we should tolerate. But we don't have to tolerate that. We put in measures to protect lives for all sorts of things. You mentioned hurricanes. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 changed our lives in ways that we're still feeling today. We put in measures to protect lives from car accidents, from flu, from all kinds of things. But there is a question about what sorts of deaths this country is prepared to normalize to and what sorts it draws a line under and says no more. COVID can be the latter. We don't have to accept our acceptance of it.
All right, Ed Yong, the latest piece of yours in The Atlantic is called "How Did This Many Deaths Become Normal?" Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
As the conflict in Ukraine intensifies, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are calling for more support for Ukraine. This comes as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy prepares to address Congress later this week. Here to break down what's at stake is Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. And hello, it is very good to see both of you again in the studio, plowing ahead. But the news
So now with Jenny Craig.
Is because they work up to 12 hours, even on moderate pain.
Kind of remarkable agreement right now between the two parties that Russia is doing horrific things in Ukraine and that Russia needs to be punished. How unusual is it to see the two political parties in agreement on foreign policy.
Well, there is nothing like a common enemy to help unite the political parties and to unite politics. And you have Vladimir Putin in popularity now somewhere down by, you know, Fidel Castro and Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. When there is someone who is so clearly disliked by the world and by the American public, it helps members of Congress be able to come together. I think inevitably there will be disagreements about tactics, and you occasionally see some of those fissures already. People, Republicans especially, saying President Biden maybe isn't going far enough. President Biden insisting on staying closely tied to the allies and moving in conjunction with allies, even at times when it's frustrating for members of his own party. But at this moment, there is something like unity. Even the American people see, a large share of the American people seem willing to pay more for gas even to stick it to Russia and Putin.
And when you look, but Amy, when you look beneath the surface, how real is that agreement?
That's right. So what we see is Americans rallying around the policies of the administration. Yes, we support sanctions on gas. Yes, we want to see more aid going to Ukraine. Send them more weapons. But they're not rallying around the president. And so the president's overall approval ratings haven't budged all that much, even as people are saying they do approve of what his administration has done, which I think speaks to, at the end of the day, we can all agree on a common enemy, but it doesn't mean that we agree that the president himself is doing the job they want him to do.
And it is a question, because if you were pointing out to us today a poll that showed there's agreement that the president is making the right decisions when it comes to Ukraine, but less support for his overall handling of Ukraine.
The handling,
I was trying to figure out
how does that work?
The difference?
Right, 59% say Biden's made the right decisions on Ukraine, but just 43% approve of the way he's handling Ukraine, which goes to the deeper, at the end of the day, we still remain an incredibly polarized country. I also think driving so much
a lot of that is built in.
A lot of that is built in, right, that you're not going to give President Biden any credit at all, even if you like what his administration is doing.
Is it like substance versus style almost?
There's some of that, I think, and I think also so much of what's baked in about frustration with Biden is about the other thing that's on top of everybody's mind, inflation and gas prices.
And inflation still is a very real concern. We're in a midterm election.
Absolutely, and it is painful to fill up at the gas pump. It is, every time you go to the grocery store, you are reminded that inflation is real. And gas prices and inflation are things that the President of the United States has very little power to do anything about, and yet it can seal his fate, seal his party's fate.
And Amy, you were also, we were going back and forth today, if you will, about historically how presidents may start out being seen in one way when it comes to a foreign crisis. As time goes on, we think of the war in Iraq, for example, that things can change.
Exactly. Or for George H.W. Bush, the success of that war did not help him in his reelection, in part because we were going through really tough economic times. And so he got a tremendous amount of support there, but it didn't translate.
Well, we are, as we've been pointing out, only 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks into this war, going on 3. So,
and I think that's also important, how much this drags out, and it only makes the president's job even harder on those inflationary issues. When you have a war that drags on, it means more pressure on gas prices for longer and other inflationary pressures coming from the sanctions. And then the rise of COVID in places like China, or the reemergence in places like China or Europe, also impact this inflationary pressure.
No question.
Defense contractors that mass produce Javelin and Stinger missiles. Coincidentally, as America has been shipping those missiles into Ukraine thanks to aid packages negotiated by Congress. One of those people, Republican Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger of Tennessee, she made 15 G's trading Raytheon stock all throughout the month of January. And Democrat Congresswoman Lois Frankel made at least 15,000 from trading Lockheed Martin in January, right before Putin's invasion. And according to disclosures, she's still sitting on a lot of shares of that company. It's a pretty good investment. That stock's up over 10% in just 3 weeks since Russia invaded. Now, those two made trades in the lead up to Putin's invasion, but other lawmakers who have influence over military contracts and appropriations have owned stock in defense companies for a very long time, like Democratic Senator John Hickenlooper, who owns a big position in Raytheon. According to his latest financial disclosure, he owns anywhere between $100,000 and $250,000 in the stock. And here's a real conflict of interest. Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who just happens to sit on the Homeland Security Committee, holds about $15,000 in Raytheon shares. And right now, Raytheon and Lockheed doing big business. And once Biden signs that $6.5 billion defense deal, those companies and the members of Congress who own stock in them, they're going to cash in. Ned Ryan is the founder of American Majority, and he's been following.
And now we're providing billions of dollars for affordable home lending programs. As
prescriptions, dental coverage, and the benefit that adds money back
to QuickBooks. Trilogy for COPD.
We still have that drought taking place. Further off to the east, not quite as bad, and we're going to continue with those dry conditions as well throughout a majority of this week. Futurecast for tonight showing those clouds clearing out, sunshine back with us tomorrow. Wednesday, we start to see some extra clouds building in, and all that's really going to do is result in kind of a mix of sun and clouds for the day. A few sprinkles possible throughout Wednesday morning, but most of us will kind of avoid that and really not see anything meaningful for any rainfall just yet. The next 10 days in Sioux Falls, mid-60s tomorrow and Wednesday. It'll be a little bit cooler for St. Patrick's Day on Thursday, but again, mid-50s, not bad. This weekend, the 60s are back, sunshine, and then we officially begin spring on Sunday. Next chances of rain build in for the start of next week. That'll be on Monday and on Tuesday. In Aberdeen, for you, 60 tomorrow.
Ask your doctor about Once Daily Trilogy and save at Trilogy. So you can enjoy the rewards of living.
Tom Brady has finally failed at something, and that was retirement. It didn't take long for Brady to tire of golf or for Giselle to tire of having him around all day. Those are the only two explanations for this weekend's news that about a month since he retired from football, Tom Brady, as the song continues to say, is back. Few things are as obnoxious as unretirements, but this one might set an all-time record for a comeback, as we said, 41 days. Which makes you wonder if the retirement was real even to start with. Just think about how much more merchandise he's now going to sell over the next year. All the stories that are going to be done on TB12, that's his wellness company, free publicity for how TB12 is making his big comeback from retirement. Then there are the real suckers, like the guy who bought into this being his actual real retirement. The poor guy who spent $518,000 just a couple of days ago on Tom Brady's last touchdown ball. Wonder what that touchdown ball is worth now. All right, so who knows how much Brady's going to make over the next few years, but hopefully he makes that guy good. It is, after all, the least he could do. And what are they thinking in New England, perhaps, all those Patriot fans who now have to have their wounds reopened? Brady says he has unfinished business, but the all-time #1 in 35 categories and counting, 4 of the most important being 7 Super Bowl wins, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, 624 passing touchdowns, 243 wins. How many more rings does a guy need or want? It's not clear if he can actually fit any more on his hand. And everybody does hate a winner. Perhaps that's what's happening here. But the real winners are the restaurant and bar owners in Tampa, among them Jason McGarry of Riveters in Tampa. All right, are people coming out to celebrate Brady's return yet?
Oh, the town is electric. Everyone's happy to see Tom Brady come back. You wouldn't even believe it.
Are there drink specials happening? What's going on?
Oh, we always have drink specials on Sunday. It's standing room only in the bar.
Yeah, well, it looks like it. Tell me how big of a difference it was of having Tom Brady and that feeling in Tampa versus him not being here.
Well, Tom Brady, I mean, he is the GOAT. And ever since he came to Tampa Bay, on and off the field, his impact has been tremendous. I mean, from the second he was here, tickets sold out, jerseys sold out, the hotels and hospitality has been booming. And we really know who to thank for that. We know how lucky we are that he came to Tampa.
They say the Brady effect is real, right? That other pro sports teams do better. How much better is the bars and the restaurants doing, or did they do with Brady in town?
The numbers are astronomical. I'm sure he's brought millions upon millions of dollars to our local economy and small businesses.
All right, so what was the general talk around the bar today? Is there real surprise at this?
Yeah, some surprise, a lot of smiling faces. It's definitely the talk at the bar today.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Does this make up for the fact that spring training's so late?
Oh, definitely. I would take that trade any day.
All right, a couple weeks with no baseball.
That I got my hands on from someone who worked at a Russian media outlet, says it is essential to use Tucker Carlson as much as possible. And I have to say, in the whole 12-page memo, and I have another one that's 12 pages from a different day that mentions Tucker as well, there is no other Western or American journalist mentioned. He is the only one. And they say use him because he's saying that the U.S. and NATO, they're the ones who unleashed this conflict. Because he's blaming Biden and NATO for this, the Russians want to use him. And we see that on RT and other Russian media outlets. They've used him. They've even used him recently for this bogus allegation that there are bioweapon labs in Ukraine, and that's what this is all about, because he was on TV talking about it. So this is just standard disinformation tactics. If you can use someone from the other side making your point, particularly if your point is a lie, it's great. And so they have just latched onto him, and we saw it even before the memo. We see the memo now makes it kind of official, and they're getting their money's worth. If you saw from just the clips you played.
And Malcolm, let me bring you in here because there are lesser idiots involved as well. I mean, useful idiots as well. You've got the I don't remember her name, the black lady that Kanye West elevated for no good reason, saying you should really get your information from Putin's speech. You've got Tulsi Gabbard, who's a member of the United States military, just directly parroting the talking points. You've got Laura Ingraham. You do have this sort of parade of MAGA world that are parroting Russian talking points. It is shocking, I think, to hear it coming out of American mouths. Is the Kremlin writing this? How does this, what do you think of it all?
You know, the interesting thing about history is every once in a while you get to see it come back again. You know, when I was young, we would hear about Tokyo Rose, the American collaborator who was making radio transmissions in Japan to demoralize American servicemen, or Lord Haw Haw, who did the same thing for the Nazis in World War II. I never thought that these people didn't believe what they were saying. They always were very clear that they believed in Nazism, they believed in the Imperial Japan strategy. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Tulsi Gabbard, I think somewhere along the line they don't believe this, but they think that it's in their interest to say these things. For Tucker Carlson, it's pretty clear. He is MAGA world. And anything that, that helps Donald Trump out, whether it means turning against the United States, collaborating with another country's propaganda machine, so long as it gets him the adoration of MAGA world, he will do it. I don't know if he really loves Vladimir Putin, but I have to clarify one thing, Joy. These people are not useful idiots. They are beyond useful idiots. Useful idiots don't know, as a term of art in the intelligence world, they don't really know what they're doing. They're just stupid. These people are almost collaborators to a certain extent. They do know what they're doing. I would call them an asset, especially Tucker Carlson. And Tulsi Gabbard, she's just a moron. But for these people to come up there, we are now seeing a term that I never thought I'd see in my life. Fifth columnist. People who are deliberately working to undermine the American structure.
And, David, the one, far from me forever to disagree with my friend Malcolm Nance. I mean, the difference is Tokyo Rose, ultimately was cleared because she was trying to sort of make the people that she was doing these broadcasts for believe that she didn't believe in the United States and that she was on the side of Imperial Japan. It turned out she was making her broadcast deliberately goofy in order to undermine it. In the case of Tucker Carlson, it seems like he's deliberately making it more and more and more overtly propagandistic, overtly pro-Putin. Is there anything anything in those memos that indicates that there's anything that they're giving to these people? Is there is there something exchanging hands here, or are they doing it for free?
There's nothing that exchanges hands, and I've thought about this too. Not, you know, Tucker has his opinions. He's free to have them and to share them, and maybe they even line up with the opinions of Vladimir Putin and Russian propagandists. But I have to say this. If I was being cited in memos like this by a barbaric regime that's killing civilians, I would say, hey, leave me out of it. I would say, you know, we made it. I may agree that this is America's fault. I may agree that, you know, that you have a right to do this, but that's my honest opinion. But I don't want to be brought in by your disinformation and propagandist tactics. So he hasn't done that. And in fact, he's done everything to make himself of tremendous use. So even the other day, when Victoria Nuland, a Secretary of State official, testified that there are biolabs in Ukraine and we're worried about the materials, you know, not that there were bioweapon labs or that there are U.S. labs, he was out there saying, see, the Russian disinformation is right.
Right.
And so that's going over the line, because also, he's not a reporter on the ground. He doesn't know what's true or not.
Yeah.
He took her testimony and he warped it exactly in keeping with what the Russians want to be said.
Yeah.
And so he has the right to say what he wants to say. I'll defend that, even if he's wrong. But if he's being used this way, he also has the obligation to say, hey, I'm not part of that team.
Take us into spy world for a moment, Malcolm. What would Russia, you know, do with such assets? Because they've got them.
Well, I mean, they're doing what they're doing, which is the amplification of disinformation that is now validated by a journalist, and I throw that in big quotes.
Even his bosses don't say he's a journalist. You take him to court, they say, don't believe anything he says. That's dumb.
But we are literally in a cycle of Soviet disinformation from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I just can't believe it. This is stuff I read in history books about propaganda and disinformation warfare is carried out by the Soviet Union. We are in Pravda country, where every word out of Russia was a lie. Yeah. These people are, first, as we used to call them, useful idiots, but then they've now bumped up to where they want to amplify Russia's message. They need to damage the United States. I, too, defend Tucker Carlson's right to say any stupid thing he wants because he's a moron. But that does not give him the right to create a disinformation bubble around the truth in order to magnify a potential enemy who is actually killing people, a dictatorship, for him to do that. That's just shameful.
They've turned against the West and in favor of Putin. Unbelievable. David Corn, Malcolm Nance, thank you guys. That is the readout tonight. Ollie with Chris Hayes starts next.
Raises more.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Happy Monday. Here's something we just saw. I wish we brought it to you earlier. Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, of course, gave an interview recently that didn't get enough attention in this country. Zelenskyy, needless to say, is currently engaged in a desperate fight for his country, his government, his life. And he has been since the Russian military invaded Ukraine nearly 3 weeks ago. So you can assume there's not a lot Zelenskyy thinks about at this point apart from getting the Russians off of Ukrainian soil. So last week, Zelenskyy floated the idea of accepting so-called Ukrainian neutrality, agreeing not to join NATO. In exchange for that, he would get a Russian withdrawal from Ukraine. Now, there's nothing inherently controversial about Zelenskyy's idea. Ukraine was not on the cusp of joining NATO anyway. NATO officials have long said they don't want Ukraine to join. It's not clear whose interest would be served by Ukraine joining NATO. So if accepting the status quo, going with the way things already were and were always going to be, if doing that convinces Putin to stop killing Ukrainians and spares Ukraine from total and complete destruction, maybe it's not a crazy idea. Maybe Zelenskyy is on to something. He certainly thought about it a lot. Maybe we ought to congratulate Zelenskyy for acting wisely on behalf of the country he leads. This could be a win for him and for the entire world. Probably not a lot of American media outlets will describe it that way, however. Indeed, by mentioning NATO, a topic that is completely off limits in American media, Zelenskyy may have gone too far. Daily, in every possible venue, we are told that NATO is, paradoxically, both of its central importance to the United States and at the same time irrelevant to what happens in Eastern Europe. So years of talk about expanding NATO into Ukraine, and we've watched those happen in public, That had nothing whatsoever to do with Russia invading Ukraine. Nothing at all. That's what they tell us. Putin invaded Ukraine because he's bad. End of conversation. And anyone who says otherwise, anyone who suggests there might be a way out of this disaster short of total war, anyone who says that is immediately denounced as a tool of Russian propaganda. So what does that mean? It means that by acknowledging that NATO expansion is what Putin seems to care about most, Zelenskyy is by definition, at least in this country, repeating Russian talking points. That would make the president of Ukraine a Putin collaborator. Sound insane? Well, then you can still think clearly. But that's the state of play. How do we know this? Let's just say we've lived it. We've made the point repeatedly that forcing Ukraine into NATO will in no way serve the interests of the United States, and in fact could hurt us here in ways from which we will never recover. And by the way, talking about it doesn't seem to have helped Ukraine either. For saying that, and that's all we've said, here's the reaction we've received. And this is just a small selection. We could do a full hour on it, but here's a clip.
What seems to be almost the Putin wing of the Republican Party, which to be fair, is not prevalent much on Capitol Hill, but we've seen Tucker Carlson, basically repeat Russian propaganda night after night. What the hell is going on?
Well, first of all, before they fell in love with Putin, they fell in love with Orban in Hungary. Make America great again meant, let's make America more like Hungary.
And the most popular Republican broadcaster in America, Tucker Carlson, are both unabashed fans of Putin. And there are very few Republicans out there like Mitt Romney or Liz Cheney who have the courage to call them out. This is a disgrace.
How anybody in this country, which loves freedom, can side with Vladimir Putin, which is an oppressor, a dictator. He kills people. He imprisons his political opponents. He has been an adversary of America at every chance he's had. It's unthinkable to be. It's almost treasonous.
Ooh, almost treasonous. Siding with Putin. Who's siding with Putin? I haven't seen anybody do that. I've seen a few people try to side with the United States. And that, says Mitt Romney, a man who got 4 deferments to keep himself out of the Vietnam War, that is almost treasonous. What's so interesting, we don't want to pick on Mitt Romney.
To China for help across the board. And that is prompting a fateful decision for China. NBC News reporting the U.S. government has reason to believe Russia asked China for military equipment and other support following the start of its war in Ukraine. Moscow and Beijing both denied that request has been made, but according to the Financial Times, the U.S. has told allies that China signaled its willingness to provide military assistance after Russia requested equipment, including surface-to-air missiles, to support its invasion of Ukraine. Today in Rome, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with China's top diplomat for 7 hours. A senior administration official described the talks as intense. What I would say in general is that we do have deep concerns about China's alignment with Russia, the official said. The National Security Advisor was direct about those concerns, the potential implications and consequences of certain actions. But it is clear that even if there's not a formal request for help, the question of what China does here is one of enormous global import. At least one Chinese academic is publicly writing that China should side with the West in this, quote, to demonstrate China's role as responsible major power. China not only cannot stand with Putin, but also should take concrete actions to prevent Putin's possible adventures. China is the only country in the world with this capability and must give full play to this unique advantage. There are no signs, however.
Are most people staying there, or are they en route to somewhere else outside of Poland? Have you been able to tell?
It just depends. I mean, some people are taking this one step at a time, and their goal is just to get across the border and then figure out their next step. Other people are heading around the EU in order to stay with family. And, you know, keep in mind, when you cross from Ukraine into the EU, that opens up your travel possibilities. When you cross from Ukraine into Poland, you can go to a lot more places. So that's what we're starting to see, is that some people are going to other countries, but it just depends on the situation.
Just considering all of their options. Robert, appreciate you and your team. As always, stay safe out there, and to all of the journalists who are covering this war, we are thinking about you tonight. We'll talk to you soon, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Tim Crockett, has trained network journalists and others on how to operate in these hostile situations like war, and he is joining us now with a bit of his expertise. Sir, thank you so much for your time. I'm curious, the situation that we're seeing in Ukraine is so dangerous, more so by the day. How does it compare in your mind to other war zones that you've seen?
So every conflict zone, war zone, has its unique dangers. Everyone can expect bombs, bullets, belligerents, the real sort of hard threats. But there's a lot of other things that you need to be aware of. We've got road traffic accidents. We've got confusion in certain situations. So it is an unpredictable situation that can quickly change from bad to worse.
What is the greatest threat to journalists on the ground there right now?
I think the further they move in to cover the areas of conflict, the speed at which they can quickly get overrun and then perhaps targeted. So I think it's a case of knowing what's going on around you, having a better sense as to what could go wrong, and sort of trust your own gut, because you are literally working alone out in some of these places.
And trusting your gut, how about trusting the people around you? That has to be a challenge in this environment.
It is. In most of the environments that I've operated in the past, we've been there for some time, or there's been a network that's already been established. So you can't get around, you can't operate safely with any degree of safety without some local fixers, journalists, help of some sort. The speed at which this situation has sort of devolved makes that even more difficult, because there may not be those established sort of networks that you can trust.
And these are seasoned war correspondents that we're seeing on the screen just moments ago, one killed, another one injured. When you ready teams for these hostile, high-risk situations, what do you tell them going in?
Again, know what you're getting into. Make sure that you're fully prepared, have a good means of communication, and not try and get too complacent. That is one of the dangers when you are a seasoned journalist that perhaps has covered many other conflicts, other wars, that perhaps you do kind of start to think that you know the situation. And often you can get yourself into a problem where then, like I said, the battle, the conflict going on around you, that you can quickly lose control.
At what point do you advise clients it's time to get out? It's no longer safe to be there.
That's a difficult situation, because it's hard. You get sucked into what's going on around you, and it's hard when you have a lack of information or a wider battle picture. Obviously, if you're caught up in these situations, you've got to get yourself out of the killing ground and then have a plan. So often you have to take it sort of almost step by step. If this happens, I'm going to do this, and then once I got there, I'm going to come out of here. And then have that kind of running in sort of in the background when you know you're getting closer to the front line. And then if something happens, you've just got to move. And then once you're in an area of safety, where do you go to next? It's not kind of just black and white, on and off. It's a constant assessment.
Always on the move. And the other thing, Tim, that is so unique about what we're seeing in Ukraine is the access to the information, the video, and the stories from the ground through social media. We've got correspondents like Robert for all of the other networks who are appearing regularly on different shows for hours at a time. How has social media and having this information so quickly at people's fingertips, even for the enemy, changed the game?
Well, it certainly helps getting the information out and telling what's actually happening on the ground. Obviously, it's probably less useful for individual journalists that are going forward into a newer area. And that's often where you have to sort of stop, take pause, move a little bit further forward and so forth. But once there, again, you've got to be smart about when and where you report back, because that information, while it's important, can also be used against you.
Wow. Lives are on the line. Tim Crockett, thanks for giving us some of your time and for what you're doing to make sure that all of our journalists are better prepared as they head over there. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anne Rakova is a student at Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. She's also a writer, and her father is fighting on the front lines. Anna is joining us live tonight. Anna, thank you for talking to us. First of all, your dad, how often are you able to be in communication with him?
Yeah, my dad now in the front line in Kiev, but we are still trying to be in touch, and I can send a message to him like a few times today.
And is he able to send messages back to you on his status and how he's doing?
Yes, yes, we can talk a little.
What does he say?
It's pretty hard now, and he also asked me to pray about him a lot, but I understand that mentally we are very close now because he gave his vital forces to victory of Ukraine, and me too. We are doing the same thing, I think.
Talk to me a little bit about what we're seeing happen in the West now. The Russian troops are now targeting some areas in the West. How has that changed the threat level where you are and elsewhere?
Yes, there was bombing in Yavoriv last morning, and there was 35 killed. It was pretty stressful for us, but we are still in charge. We are accepting refugees, and everyone is trying to be involved in the volunteer activity or some other things that lead Ukraine into victory. So I think Western Ukraine is great.
Are you prepared, Anna, to stay if things do get worse?
Yeah, exactly. I understand that I will be there and I will write, I will be in charge, and I will do as much as I can for the victory. Yeah.
What are you doing without compromising, obviously, your safety and location, some steps you're taking to remain safe?
I try to understand where is the safety place in my city and in my university. I'm trying to be just ready if I hear the signal to go, and understand that we need also be in common. So I am with my colleagues, with my friends. It helps us.
What are you doing to find your strength right now? When you look at these images of bodies being thrown into mass graves, that horrible video from Mariupol of the hospital, and now this military target on the western side of the country, where do you find the strength each day to face the dangers that are in front of you?
Thank you. That's a great question. I was thinking today about my father, and I was thinking why I don't have a fear of death now. I understand that I haven't a fear of death because my father hasn't a fear of death. And in this state, we are like almost omnipotent. And I hope that in this state, the person or maybe country too can make the greatest progress when we are on the verge of the life and death. I'm thinking about my father and about my friends that are doing a great job now with me. It gives me strength.
Anna, thank you for your strength and for your resilience, and we have learned so much, the world has, about the Ukrainian people. I pray for you and for your father and for his safety. It means a lot to us that you gave us some of your time.
Thank you.
Be safe. Still to come here on Prime, watching Putin's next move with China after the break, new efforts by the U.S. to keep Russia isolated. Plus, the threat of chemical warfare, America's plan if the conflict in Ukraine escalates to a level that we haven't seen in years. That is coming up here on NewsNation Prime.
Babies over to where you are in Lviv or elsewhere in the country where they could be met by their new parents in relative safety. I did also hear of an Argentine couple that came all the way into Kiev to ran the gauntlet to pick their child up, but some have been there stuck for months, Anderson.
Sam Kiley, Caitlin Collins, appreciate it. We talked at the top of the broadcast about defiance inside Russia. It is a rare commodity there and so dangerous to anyone practicing it. Coming up next, my conversation with someone who is at great risk to himself as an American in Moscow. And later, the former American ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, joins us to talk more about her warning that a moment like this might come.
Ready to style in just one step? Introducing new Tresemme One-Step Stylers. 5 professional benefits, 1 simple step. Total.
People die last year? No. Rob Portman doesn't care. What he cares about is Ukraine. And he shares that concern with Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and, of course, Liz Cheney. So they are unified. But what's so interesting, if this is such a unifying moment, then why was their first instinct to denounce fellow Americans as traitors and call for them to be imprisoned? Really unifying? They don't care about Ukraine, a lot of these people, any more than they cared about George Floyd. They used tragedy, George Floyd's death, the tragic invasion of Ukraine, for domestic political purposes. This
The Open had in the past trained Ukrainian forces. It's a place where NATO had trained Ukrainian forces. It is a widening of the air campaign. There's really 2 fronts to this war now. You have that air campaign widening and then these ground forces that are choking these cities. The situation in Mariupol is a humanitarian catastrophe. More than 10 days now, people without food, without water, without power. There is reporting that people are fighting over food as they can only get above ground for a few hours at a time. And then in Kharkiv, you have an even more desperate situation where people are not even able to leave their basements because of the indiscriminate shelling. In the last hour, Chris, we've heard once again from the Ukrainian president, and he's going out of his way, this is now the 4th time, to speak Russian directly, not just to the Russian people, but to Russian soldiers. I'll just give you a bit of the quote here. He talks to Russian conscripts directly and says, "You will be taking lives because there are a lot of you, but what are you dying for?" he says, "and why?" And then he gives them a choice. He says, "If you surrender, we will give you a chance to live. If you surrender to our forces, we will treat you like humans and the way they ought to be treated, with dignity, not the way that you are being treated by your army." He also applauds the courageous behavior that we've seen on Russian state television in the last 24 hours by one journalist holding up a sign. I know you're going to talk about that later. This is his way, Chris, of going around Russian state TV, of addressing all of the misinformation that the Russian people are being shown. He's putting it on Telegram so that people can find it on social media. And again, going out of his way to speak Russian to the Russian people and these Russian soldiers, hoping that they may sort of catch a glimpse of it. This is all, of course, part of his wider plan to try to bolster support and try to rally people to the front, Chris.
One quick follow-up, Cal, you're in Lviv in the west there. We've watched, I mean, there are cities in the, right at the border, Kharkiv and Mariupol just devastated, essentially led rude to. Kyiv is still sort of standing. Lviv has not had the same level of, pressure put on it, but how is daily life continuing there? Like power, food, like the basics of infrastructure, how well do they continue to function?
So the infrastructure is in place. The power and the water are still up and running. 3 days ago, the power tripped out for about 6 hours, and I think people certainly worried about that. During the day, you have restaurants that are full. They're running out of food, but they're full. And you also have the story of 2 cities. So behind me in the old district, you have full restaurants, but just a mile away at the train station, you have people sleeping outside, people who can't find food, who can't find water. There's 300,000 extra people that are now taxing this city. And look, it's happening in Poland, too. We heard from the mayor of Warsaw tonight say that he's seen an increase of 15% in the population there. So you have these cities that are bursting at the seams, Chris.
That's really, really eye-opening, Cal. I really appreciate it. Cal Perry, live in Lviv. As always, excellent work. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Helene Cooper is a Pentagon correspondent at the New York Times. She just returned from a reporting trip to Eastern Europe, traveling with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, as he toured NATO countries, and she joins me now. Helene, the Pentagon has been offering some briefings and information on how they view things, at least on the ground. Some interesting details today, if you can just give us a sense of their view of the state of this war between Russia and Ukraine.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's been fascinating to listen to the Pentagon day after day after day, as they have, after saying at the beginning that they didn't want to narrate the war, as they've then turned around and narrated the war. According to the Pentagon, this much vaunted Russian convoy is still stalled. All of these different axes that Russia started towards Kyiv, for instance, are stalled. And primarily you're seeing this aerial bombardment, but the Russian military continues to underperform the ground forces at the very least. And the Pentagon has sort of laid out some of the reasons why. A big reason why is because of the ferocious fighting that's being done by the Ukrainians, because of the anti-tank missiles that they've used really well. They've gone out into fields and gone after these tanks, but also because of low morale in the Russian military, as well as the fact that Putin sent a conscript military into Ukraine without telling them why they were there, or that even that they were going there. So there are a lot of issues going on with the Russian military. That's in the eastern part of the country. In the west, where you saw this attack 2 days ago on this airfield that Cal Perry just talked about, the Pentagon says that that attack did not actually get any of the weapons that are being funneled into Ukraine right now, coming from NATO countries. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby spoke about this this afternoon during his press conferences and said that weapons are continuing to go forth from different sites. So it's been this horrific story of an aerial bombardment that's been inflicted on the civilian population while not doing as much damage to the Ukrainian military as anybody expected.
Yeah, that seems to be the continuing top line story here. Obviously, we're all operating in a kind of fog of war here, but you see like the stalling of military advancement or very slow progress with the continued, what appears to be indiscriminate shelling of heavily populated civilian areas, big apartment buildings, targets such as that, hospitals, we've seen those hit. I want to just play a little bit of what John Kirby today at the Pentagon had to say just about this sort of the fact that we're not seeing these forces push forward. Take a listen.
We're going to be careful here at the Pentagon in terms of providing a qualitative report card assessment here and putting a name on it, standstill or what have you. What I would tell you, David, is that the Ukrainians continue to fight back very bravely and skillfully. If you just look at the map and you just look at how little progress the Russians have been able to make in the 2+ weeks now that they've been at this, yes, some of that is due to their own stumbles and missteps and logistical problems, but a lot of it is due to the Ukrainian resistance.
Do you have a sense from the Pentagon as well how they're reacting to the Russians made an announcement in the last 2 or 3 days that, military shipments of arms, any sort of convoys to arm Ukrainians would be viewed by them as legitimate military targets. That strike in the western part of the country, 50 miles from Poland, seemed to be a kind of message-sending strike in that regard. How the Pentagon is receiving all that?
They've been expecting this, Chris, for almost 3 weeks now. I was on the border, on the Ukrainian border, at one of the the weapons transfer sites, and at the time I interviewed troops on the ground. I interviewed people who were involved in the weapons transfers. We saw javelins being unloaded from warplanes, and I kept asking people, why haven't the Russians hit this yet? And they expressed surprise that they hadn't been hit yet. There was a lot of speculation as to why. I don't want to repeat a lot of it because at this point in time, this was speculation. Nobody knew exactly why. The assumption at the time, and this was a few days ago, appeared to be that the Russians were so bogged down and so busy in the eastern part of the country that they hadn't been able to get around to targeting other sites where weapons could be coming in. Maybe that's about to change, but I think it is certainly a sign of, again, I don't want to overstate things by saying ineptitude, but it's a sign of the dysfunction within the Russian military that something that basic that is pretty well known and kind of out there hasn't been targeted yet.
All right, Helene Cooper, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You.
Still to come, the latest turn in Russian state television's use of an American cable news host to sell Putin's war. That story next.
America, and just spreading information, helping each other install VPNs to get access to information. But I was just talking to my grandmother's nanny. She's an older Russian woman. She wears a babushka scarf, you know, that everyone I think in America can imagine. And I asked her, what do you want the world to know about how you feel about this? And she said, I don't have the strength to protest. But if you were to tell me that you could shoot me dead and the war would end today, I would hand you the gun. And then she added, every mother in Russia feels the same way. And I believe that reflects the opinion of a lot of people. And so we do see a lot of quiet protests. And there's a lot of people who just wish they knew that they could make a difference.
Do you think you'll be able to get your grandmother out?
I hope so. It's been very difficult with the U.S. to arrange for any kind of visa, whether family reunification or humanitarian parole are years backlogged. The Russian consulate has not been able to work on visitor visas for years due to political reasons. The Warsaw consulate is obviously overwhelmed with urgent humanitarian need with Ukrainian refugees. I'm literally working with lawyers trying to call every consulate in Europe, just finding someone who'd be willing to at least hear her case. We're not having much luck yet, but we have some backup plans. We are Russian Jewish descent. Israel is a backup plan. We may, you know, if worst comes to worst, we can try Armenia or Georgia, as many conscientious objectors in Russia have done. I'm optimistic.
Yakov Kronrod, I wish you the best. Be careful.
Thank you very much, Anderson.
Welcome next, my conversation with photographer and foreign correspondent Marcus Yam, what he has been seeing in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv.
It's all you. No, I insist. It's your turn. No, but
as Putin becomes increasingly cornered and desperate, he is fully capable, as we've seen, of lashing out.
Former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs, Andrew Weber, says it's also possible an attack may happen on U.S. soil, adding that America is much better equipped to handle the detrimental impact versus a smaller country with fewer resources like Ukraine.
We have capabilities to respond to save lives. We have the strategic national stockpile of antibiotics and antidotes to chemical weapons. So we domestically have a good capability to respond. We need to improve that further.
And Weber noting these are weapons of terror used for psychological reasons that can lead to mass casualties, adding it's more likely for Putin to use chemical or biological weapons rather than embark on a nuclear attack.
Wow. Scary thought either way. All right, Kelly, thank you. Stephen Durlaff is a professor at Harris School of Public Safety at the University of Chicago. Joins us now to talk more about this scary threat. Sir, appreciate your time. Do you agree with the assessment, or how confident are you in the U.S.'s ability to defend against this type of warfare?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Let me say, first off, one wants to distinguish between the dangers to the United States homeland versus the situation in Ukraine. And what I mean by that is it's extremely unlikely that Russia would, under any circumstances, use biological or chemical weapons directly against the United States. The crisis right now is that if these weapons are used in Ukraine, that represents a qualitative change in the behavior of the Russians and leads to the dangers of subsequent escalation. By way of background, the thing to think about is the United States has two objectives. One is the humanitarian as well as strategic one of expelling Russia from Ukraine and allowing Ukraine to reemerge as a functioning polity. The second issue is that simultaneously it has to manage this crisis in a way that one doesn't go down paths of increasing escalation in which nuclear weapons are the endpoint and obviously the ultimate catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And so were the Russians to do this, that would represent a qualitative change in their behavior, which is going to require a qualitative change in ours. And so if you ask me the biggest danger of this, I would say, frankly, it is because it would then require the United States to, if I were the policymaker, to no longer have a no-fly zone and no longer keep boots off the ground within Ukraine.
Right.
And so I don't mean.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just onto your point, given the fact that we aren't seeing any deterrence with sanctions and other measures. What can you share? We talked about this a moment ago with Kelly about Russia's stockpile of chemical weapons and how real that threat is from them, their capabilities.
Well, the truth is, I don't think that certainly somebody without a classified clearance, which I don't have, can say anything because they're illegal. The claim that Russia makes is that the stockpile has been destroyed, and so they deny their existence, and so consequently, there's really very little knowledge of that that would be unclassified. I think what one could say is that we do know that there is every reason to believe they have them. There's every reason to believe they will not feel moral qualms in using them, as evidenced by what happened in Syria. And we have to, I think, naturally pair them with the other types of weapons of mass destruction, one of which is tactical nuclear weapons, they are not only known to be in the possession of the Russian military, but there's over 2,000 warheads. And so in my mind, the chemical weapons are, function slightly differently because they are not nuclear weapons, but they're in the same category of a profound change in the level of violence that is being used in the war, and it moves into what the world has already defined as war crimes.
A frightening thought. Before I let you go, what is the most dangerous chemical weapon out there?
I don't think that there's one I would say is the most dangerous. I mean, they come in different varieties. Some are nerve agents, others are blistering agents, and I could give you more horror stories. And so all of them have the same thing. They terrorize populations. They can cause, terrible physical consequences in addition to death. And so there's a good reason that the better angels of our nature on this planet tried to abolish them, even if it's been unsuccessful.
So good wins over evil on this one. Professor Durlaf, thank you. Coming up, a massive humanitarian crisis growing for Ukrainians trapped by Russian forces. After the break, we'll introduce you to one group of volunteers attempting to bring relief, responsible in the last couple of days for rescuing 2 newborn babies and this little boy. That's next.
I lost 26 pounds and I feel incredible. With the new Personal Points program, I can answer questions about my goals and the foods I love. I like that the WW Personal Points plan is built just for me.
Join now, pay later. Get your first 3 months free at WW.com. Hurry, offer ends March 14th.
I'm going to earn 3. Or this 100 by 100 on sale now.
You know I'm a kayak denier.
And we've been following, my colleague Navi Bulus and I have been following volunteers, ferrying people who don't have transportation to get out of town, and they've been just, using cars and whatever cars and any modes of transportation they can find, even like, cargo trucks to ferry people out of there and on, towards the broken bridge, and all that while, shelling is coming down. And we could see, dead civilians laying around the entire, town of Irpin. And there are some holdouts left in the city, and it's a difficult situation all around. I mean, there were some parts of the city, parts of the town that were controlled by the Russians, and it was unclear whether or not sometimes we were able to walk down those roads. At one point, we were walking down, we were standing on a street on the west side of town, and, we could hear we could hear footsteps behind them. When we looked behind, there were Russian soldiers just patrolling casually, and we quickly, ducked into a house and hid in there for a while until we figured out what to do next.
The LA Times, the piece I think you were shooting for, and that I read, was about those volunteers driving around in Irpin looking for bodies of people they knew or bodies of loved ones and to bring back. I mean, it's just extraordinary what so many people here, Ukrainians, are willing to do for their fellow countrymen and women?
This war has been interesting to cover in that sense because you see bakers, you see bankers, you see businessmen, publishers, everyday people with everyday jobs just basically drop everything they're doing now, and they kind of, you know, be the best versions of themselves. And, you know, and they are so courageous. They you know, they don't have to pick up arms necessarily to fight. They just have to do something for their fellow Ukrainians.
Yeah. Marcus Yam, covering this for the Los Angeles Times. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Let's get some more perspective now from retired Admiral James Stavridis. He's former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. In a recent Time magazine op-ed, he writes, "It is Putin who started this entirely unnecessary war, and we must not be afraid to take reasonable steps to oppose him. The West has plenty of options to confront him, and we should consider the full reins, especially in limiting Russian control of Ukrainian airspace and continuing to arm the Ukrainians for the hard ground battles ahead." Admiral Stavridis is also the author of 2034, a novel of the next world war. He joins us now. Admiral, is it a no-fly zone that you support at this stage?
Not quite. Not a NATO no-fly zone, Anderson, but I'll tell you what I do support. I support a Ukrainian no-fly zone. What I mean by that is we should be giving them not just Stinger missiles, which reach up to about 10,000 feet, not bad, but we need to give them the weapons, surface-to-air missiles that reach way up into that air stack. And Anderson, I think we should seriously consider the idea which was floated about a week ago of providing MiG-29s. These are Polish jets, fighters with ground attack capability. Give them to the Ukrainians to fly. We did this in World War II. It's a lend-lease. There's a lot of complications. Got it. We need to figure that out. It would be a huge morale boost for the Ukrainians, and it would change the facts on the ground by changing what's happening in the air.
I want to ask you, we've heard now from the leader in Poland, also U.S. officials, Jake Sullivan, among others, talking about if a missile landed in Poland, let's say, or in any NATO territory, even accidentally, the NATO alliance would respond. As the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, what does a response in a case like that look like? What does it take to, I mean, how does NATO operate? Who makes the decision to respond? Does it have to be all the countries in NATO? How would a response be actually set about?
First and foremost, in immediate combat situation, the Supreme Allied Commander, my successor, now Air Force, U.S. Air Force General Todd Walters, has the ability to respond to immediate attacks against the alliance. If it appeared to be a more measured attack, he would go to NATO, convene the NATO North Atlantic Council, and ensure that we took a measured response. But here's the point, Anderson. We are at a point where miscalculation between the U.S. and NATO on one side and Russia on the other is increasingly dangerous. On the other hand, we have to balance that with the need to provide support to the brave Ukrainians that you've been interviewing all night. I think we can find our way down that narrow passage, but it's going to require nerve, sensitivities to the situation, and an ability to apply combat power where necessary.
Admiral James Stavridis, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Just ahead, coming up, is the U.S. doing enough to support Ukraine? The former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, joins me to discuss whether the U.S. is pushing back hard enough on Russia.
Anything about any of this, our leaders are making it much worse by letting millions of foreign nationals, about whom we know nothing, into this country illegally in just the last year. In the Rio Grande Valley sector alone of the U.S. border, over the past year, there's been a 92% increase in illegal migrant encounters. Meanwhile, deportations are plummeting. So your country is completely changing at exactly the moment they're telling you to put a Ukrainian flag in your Twitter handle.
Because she was working for this
state TV channel for years. I think she's very brave, and I just hope that it's a sign of a shift in the minds of those who work for state propaganda in Russia.
Julia, it's very hard to get a kind of aggregate sense of what people are getting. What does seem clear are two things. One, a crackdown that's new, even in a place that wasn't particularly, encouraging of public dissent. And a fair amount of remarkably brave public stances, both by prominent people and everyday citizens, against the war.
Yeah, I think I agree with Tisha. I think that is hopefully a sign of a shift, because before who supported the regime insofar as a paycheck from it, because there were few opportunities to work in actual media outlets. But now the cost and the consequences of working in the regime are very high. It seems like there are more people who are willing to say, my paycheck isn't worth it if it's soaked in the blood of Ukrainian civilians.
Tikhon, could you tell me a little bit about your channel and what the last few weeks have been like for TV Rain, which was one of the independent media properties in Russia?
Well, our TV station has been the last independent TV station in Russia over the last 12 years. We've been covering everything without any blacklist or forbidden topics, and of course, Kremlin was annoyed with us. We had several attacks. We severed several acts of pressure on us, but last 2 weeks changed everything. We started broadcast 24/7, telling the truth about the war, not only spreading information from Ministry of Defense of Russia, but of course talking with Ukrainian politicians and experts and people on the ground, etc., etc. And our audience was growing very, very much on YouTube. Not to mention other platforms. We had 25 million views a day. And then when they started a military censorship in Russia, we were actually forced to shut down, to stop operating, because they adopted new laws saying that if you spread so-called fake news information about Russian soldiers, you could face up 15 years in jail. So first our website, as website of other independent media outlets, was blocked. And then we decided, when they adopted this law, we decided that we have a choice. If we could become basically the part of press office of Ministry of Defense and spread all the information of Ministry of Defense, or we could continue telling the truth and go to jail up to 15 years. We decided to not operate it anymore, because being free somewhere is better to continue telling the truth than to go to jail.
Julia, those two examples of the woman with the blank placard being arrested and the woman in the second one, that video, who comes over to say, are you taking both sides of this? I would like to express my personal citizen support for the operation. She says, I'm content, is the last thing she says. Content, she's going to say, with how things are going, I think. It's not a question even of what the message is. It's just like this desire to shut down public debate of any kind on this question.
Yeah, I probably didn't know. It was just the of her speaking to a camera, them probably not knowing who the camera was transmitting to. I'm surprised that they have a camera there to begin with. That's right off of Red Square. Right behind those buildings is Red Square. We're letting people right there but I imagine they didn't know.
Tikhon Zyatko and Julia Yaffe, thank you so much both for your time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, a wedding reception in a bomb shelter. Museum worker saving artwork last evacuated during World War II. A PhD candidate who packed a silk dress to use as bandages. The poignant first-hand account of young Ukrainians navigating the first days of the Russian invasion after this.
The pain in my knees and hips.
What that means Is China willing to offer Russia assistance in this ongoing conflict? There is the threat of chemical weapons, nuclear war. We are continuing to cover all of this from the other side of the world as you follow it along with us. We'll have special coverage once again tonight at 10 Central, 11 Eastern. My colleague Leland Vittert will be joining me once again. We'll have multiple live guests as well, taking us to the ground in Ukraine tonight as the situation continues to worsen. Up next here on Prime, a man stabs 2 employees at a New York museum and then takes off. Investigators say he is no stranger to police. We have that story coming up. Plus, it is not just rising gas prices. Thieves are now targeting gas tanks, what you should know about so-called rolling bombs, and the best piece of advice to protect you and your vehicle. Brian Enton's coming up with that next on NewsNation Prime.
Since I left for college, my dad has gotten back into some of his old hobbies.
Really? Those are the actual severe consequences if Russia uses chemical or biological weapons, or if a NATO nation were to be fired on, even accidentally. Do you expect Vladimir Putin to test this?
Well, I hope he doesn't, because I think that that would be a serious miscalculation. But we've also seen that he has miscalculated when it comes to how effective his own military would be, how effective the Ukrainian military would be, the spirit of the Ukrainian people, which he has never understood, that they are a distinct people, and it is a country that deserves to exist. And I think he underestimated the resolve of the West and our willingness to stand united with Ukraine.
You met President Zelenskyy as he was campaigning for president. I wonder what you make of how he's met this moment.
I think it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. He's gone from being a comedian to being a president to being a war hero, a war leader like I have not seen, perhaps since World War II. And he has not only inspired his own countrymen, really reflecting their spirit and strengthening them, but he has inspired the world.
We learned today the pregnant woman on the stretcher after the bombing, the maternity ward in Mariupol, has died along with her baby. Does Vladimir Putin's brutality surprise you at all at this stage? I mean, obviously you're an experienced diplomat. You have been on the ground here. You know how Russia wages war. But are you surprised at all by what is happening?
So we know the history. We've seen what Putin was responsible for in the war in Chechnya. We see what he's done in Syria. We've seen him take chunks of Georgia in 2008, chunks of Ukraine in 2014, and of course now the re-invasion of Ukraine. That's kind of history. It's all important, but to see that woman on the stretcher, I mean, that brings home the cost and the pain of war. And I think it is just a tragedy. And so, yes, I would say that it still does surprise me, because it's the human cost of war that we can just never get used to. And that is why, from the policy level, it's really important that we support Ukraine as much as we can.
Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, I really appreciate your time tonight. Again, the new memoir, congratulations on its Lessons from the Edge. It is coming out tomorrow. Coming up, Ukraine's train system has been vital to getting desperate refugees out. We're about to take you to a station where they're arriving by the thousands each day in neighboring Poland. We'll take a look at where they go after the trains pull in. We'll be right back.
Those labs, because it's a war zone, they haven't been secured, could wind up in the wrong hands. To which Tulsi Gabbard said, holy smokes, this is a big deal. I serve in the U.S. Army. We don't want that. By the way, we know that biolabs can sometimes cause massive problems for the world. I think we've just seen that. So that was Tulsi Gabbard's point. The New York Times was quick to denounce us for even talking about the subject. Oh, don't call them bioweapons. We never alleged the United States was making bioweapons. We don't know that. What we said is what's factually true, which is there are stores, we learned this from the U.S. government, of Soviet-era bioweapons in Ukraine that for some reason have not yet been destroyed. That's a huge problem, potentially. And the New York Times admitted that in their attack of us. Here's the quote. We'll just put it up. Mr. Pope, this is Robert Pope, who runs the program, had warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine may damage laboratories in the country that conduct research and disease surveillance and are supported by the United States. He noted that some of the facilities may contain pathogens once used for Soviet-era bioweapons programs, but he emphasized the Ukrainian labs did not have the ability to manufacture bioweapons. Okay. Well, we quoted him too. That's true. And it's terrifying. And if we can't respond to it because everyone's afraid of being called a tool of a foreign country, people who are trying their very hardest with the greatest level of sincerity to protect the United States, then we have lost the thread. Then we can't lead the world. We can't even lead our own country if people like that are in charge.
Equipment to making anti-tank barricades. Of course, he's one of millions of Ukrainians who've seen their entire world turned upside down by the Russian invasion, including an entire generation of young people who have only known an independent, democratic Ukraine. New York Magazine highlighted the experiences of this first generation born after Ukraine won independence, having them describe in their own words how they're experiencing this invasion day by day. New York Magazine news director Justin Miller helped edit that piece, and he joins me here. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
I thought it was a great idea for a piece, and I learned so much from just reading this. I mean, as you sort of put out in the piece, like, this generation is the first generation of Ukrainian independence, and they're now finding themselves wrenched into from sort of the fruits of modern 21st century European integration into the most brutal of circumstances.
Yeah, the war that Vladimir Putin is waging is to really destroy what this generation has known, an independent Ukraine. Not a perfect Ukraine, but that is the stakes of this war. So really the war is the story of this generation to a great degree.
There's a bunch of quotidian details, and I thought one thing that came across, and I want to sort of talk about some of the things they say. You know, I think part of the coverage, and I understand why, there's a sort of amazing emotional coverage about people rising to the occasion, staying to defend their homeland, rescuing people. There's all sorts of acts of heroism happening, unquestionably. But it's also the case that war is dark. It's dark for the human soul, and a lot of suspicion lurking in a lot of places. This was, I thought, an amazing story from Alexei, who's a printing manager in Kyiv. All the citizens began to see refugees from other regions as Russian saboteurs, as in the early days. I was standing on a bridge looking at the water, scrolling through the news on my phone when I heard a rifle bolt click behind my back. I turned around, the muzzle of an AK-47 was pointed in my face. Two policemen told me from the start, "You are a saboteur, I will shoot you now."
Yeah, so these police arrested him, took him into custody. There they humiliated him, he said. He called it a form of torture. They even looked through his phone and viewed intimate videos that he had made. Then they released him. And then a couple days later, during Spy Mania, as he calls it, it happened again. He was arrested by several policemen from a different outfit. So, you know, this sort of suspicion of everybody and the potential that anybody may be an enemy is rife throughout the country.
There's also this profound moral injury happening here as we see people, you know, again, act in incredibly heroic ways. We saw the, you know, firefighters rescuing people from a building assaulted in Kyiv. A poet and journalist in Lviv, Daniil, says this: as a volunteer, you want to help people, you can't help everyone. And you see an enormous, I've never seen such a massive pain and suffering and grief with my own eyes. It's painful. You have to shut off your empathy because otherwise you can't do your job.
Yeah, that line really stuck with me. It's like the line that a soldier may give, right? The
Yes.
soldier's job is to kill, but in this case, this man's job, this young man, is poet, journalist, who is a soft soul by his own admission. He adopts a woman's rat named Sergei to keep the rat safe in this war. He says during this train station volunteering effort that he has to turn people away, denying them potential sanctuary in a Western country such as Poland, maybe even a chance of living. And he has to turn off his empathy, and he sees fighting, nasty fighting at the train station in this tent city. He sees a grandmother kick her own granddaughter, breaks up the fight because she had been crying. I mean, just really horrific stuff, but he's still volunteering.
There's also just, I mean, again, the surreality of, and again, I think there's some complexity to this because a lot of people have been like, oh, you know, we've never, you know, these people seem so close to us, and there's like all this awful sort of embedded racial hierarchy in that, right? Like, oh, there is, though, at the same time, this is a relatively, it's the poorest country in Europe, but it's a relatively wealthy and developed place. And so the sort of daily life there is a much closer approximation than, say, Afghanistan, right? Sure. So when people are sort of looking at this from the American perspective, this line, this was a museum worker, Yulia. She says, my father is a seaman. Right now he's a ship of the ocean. He reads the news every day. He tells us, please leave every day. But I told him I don't want to leave. I don't want the status of refugee. She stayed behind. But she made this joke about a Google Calendar notification about a work meeting with my colleagues from Kyiv. I took a screenshot and sent it to her group and said, so let's call? Like, here she is. It's March 1st. There had been some office automated Google alert. It pops up on the, in the midst of the war. And I found that a moment so striking. Like this revenge of the before time happening in the midst of the war.
Yeah, it's really incredible. All of these hallmarks of life that were going on and going to be planned were severed at 5 a.m. on February 24th when this nation of people, by and large, said, or the people in our story at least said, they didn't believe that Putin would go all the way. They were almost to a person shocked that he really was going to do this.
That also comes through so clearly in these stories. It is almost unanimous.
Yes.
Throughout them. That this is like from like one day to the next, everything changing. It isn't like, even as the reporting was happening, and even as Anthony Blinken and Joe Biden and people in the U.S. are warning, saying he's going to do it, you had the Ukrainian government, which I think wanted to forestall panic, saying,
yes,
don't worry, more or less.
Right.
And so what you see in these accounts of these people is it really is like an overnight situation for them. There's not this long buildup or preparation.
One woman we spoke to, Maria, said that she got the alert on her phone at 4 a.m. or whatever, just turned over and went to sleep. And 12 hours later, she had 5 minutes to pack everything she owns, that silk gown that she hopes to wear one evening but may have to use as a bandage at any moment.
She said, we packed as a PhD candidate living in Kyiv, Maria Shuvalova. She said, we packed for 5 minutes. We took laptops, documents, also a fancy dressing gown. It's silky. It can serve you pretty well as a bandage if someone breaks a leg. All of these people are in Ukraine.
Yes.
None of them have left.
Not that we're aware of.
And I wonder, just watching them try to get their heads around what the future will bring and the skill set that they now have to transition to, like we saw the metal worker there. We've seen story after this, but it never stops being upsetting and jarring to watch someone who, was a project manager or a metal worker making children's playground equipment and is now a soldier or making tourniquets for those in the battlefield.
And having to face these unthinkable decisions, such as Maria, who said that her husband can't leave because the country's keeping all the military-aged men there, and said, please, Maria, take us and our kids, go over the border, go to safety. And she said, if I die here with my family, I'll die in peace. If I leave alive and lose my family, how can I live?
Justin Miller, who oversaw this remarkable project for New York Magazine. I really I got a vision of what this has meant in a daily way, almost unlike anything I've read. So it's great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is All In on this Monday night. The Rachel Maddow Show with Ali Velshi starts right now. Good evening, Ali.
Chris, thank you, and good evening to you, and thanks to you at home for joining us at this hour. I'm in Budapest, Hungary tonight, where thousands of Ukrainian refugees have come after fleeing the violence in their home country. More than 4,000 refugees arrived here by train yesterday alone, including more than 1,200 children.
Now, President Zelenskyy says that Russia can only take the city if it razes Kyiv to the ground, but that is exactly probably what Putin is planning. This is now an extraordinarily dangerous time for Ukraine and the entire world. And to make things dramatically worse, the world does not have a strong and a decisive U.S. president or U.S. vice president. Just take a look at your screen. This is drone footage from southern Ukraine, where multiple cities are being utterly destroyed by indiscriminate Russian artillery and bombing attacks in what is being described as a medieval siege. There is no power, there is no food, there are no medical supplies, and just miles and miles of smoldering apartment complexes, thousands of innocent men, women, and children now dead, including this pregnant woman and her unborn baby. Now, Putin's plan to quickly capture Ukraine and install a puppet regime didn't work well, and now a very angry Vladimir with his back against the wall and the world watching is hell-bent on blowing up everything and everyone in his path, and that includes, yep, innocent women and children.
Ай-яй-яй. Эх ты, сука.
Є інформація про під завалами, ми вже одного 200-го відкопали і одного...
Пришли к брату. Все вместе. Что мне так страшно было. Спустились в подвал с детьми, женщины с детьми спустились в подвал. И прилетел снаряд во двор. Нас засыпало в погребе. Двоих детей они спасли.
Them impersonating Ukrainian soldiers by stealing tanks and uniforms. Infiltrators have also been accused of numerous assassination attempts against Ukrainian President Zelenskyy. So the use of this new facial recognition could in some respects be a game changer for the Ukrainians. Joining me now is the CEO of Clearview AI, Juan Tat, who I should disclose I initially met through my father, who represents Clearview. Welcome to the show. It is great to have you here.
Thanks, Dan, for having me on. It's great to be here.
So explain to me how this happens. You just write a letter to the Ukrainians that says, "Dear Ukrainian government," and they accept it?
Well, when I started seeing the images coming out of the Ukraine, it was really upsetting and devastating because you see children, women, just, you know, and
it's tough to watch.
It's really tough to watch, right? And so, you know, started to have a lot of uptick, and people were saying, you know, what can we do as a company? A lot of companies were asking. And so when I saw some of the video footage, too, of these captured Russian soldiers who clearly really didn't want to be there, I realized, well, perhaps facial recognition could be of use. And so I was reaching out to a lot of my teammates, and we have one person on our advisory board in particular, Lee Wolowski, and he used to be an ambassador. And he was just actually in touch with the Ukrainians, and I said, well, you have to give them this letter. Here are these possible use cases on how it would work. And we kept trying. I tried almost every avenue I could think of, and they got back to us. And then I said, look, I'll help set up the accounts for free. I'll help train them. And a few days ago on Saturday, we got them set up and running. And so I think that they've grasped how useful it can be in these kind of scenarios, and we'll find out and stay in touch with them and see, you know, if there's any possible good stories that have come out of it.
Yeah, so you don't know exactly yet how the Ukrainians are using it, right?
Yes, but we, you know, when we gave them a demonstration, in the demo, they were able to give us some sample photos, and we were able to put them through. And a lot of the times, you would actually find them on the Russian social media site DAKOTA. So what's really fascinating is it could be a really big deterrent for potential infiltrators if they know that facial recognition is out there. And the other surprising things too are a lot of people in refugee situations might not have any identification with them, right? They might be just, you know, having to leave their homes in a rush, not having ID, and so that kind of processing that happens at these checkpoints to speed that up, to get more verification, could be, you know, immensely useful. So we're just beginning to understand the potential applications of the technology, and there's always certain concerns about it. But what you realize in a war zone, it's really a dangerous place, and if you can help identify people, good people on your side or not on your side, the safer it is for everybody.
So this is a question I'm sure you get asked all the time by law enforcement in this country. How accurate is it?
Yeah, so facial recognition now, and particularly Clearview AI, is extremely accurate. So we've been tested by the NIST agency, which is run here in the U.S. out of 650 algorithms. We rank overall second in the world, and the number one algorithm is the Chinese one. But modern facial recognition can pick a face out of a lineup of about 12 million at a 99.85% accuracy. And that's what our algorithm scored as. But what's more important is it's always, you have an algorithm, and then you always have human review, right? You still have to have a human judgment to to make a positive identification.
And I've got to believe that this is not the sort of technology that it could get in the hands of the Russians and then suddenly they could misuse it, because you guys still have control, right, over who has access to it.
Yeah, so as a cloud service, when we have a customer that we want to work with, we vet them, we make sure they say who they are, we're making sure that it's anyone who is either in law enforcement, military, or in the government, and then we give them proper training. So this is how you use it properly, and we also ask what scenarios are they really using it for. So if you're an investigator behind the desk and it's not always out in the field, it's extremely safe to use and easy to use, and can also reveal a lot of information they might not have had before.
Are you at all worried about Russian repercussions of now the company sort of siding with the Ukrainians?
Yeah, we're always worried about, cybersecurity in particular. It's a country that has very capable, hackers and things like that. But I think that's just part of any kind of internet business these days, is to, make sure your security is, really secure, and so we're prepared for.
And I would think that that's the sort of thing you might be pretty good at, right?
Yeah,
is cybersecurity.
We've been working really hard on it, and it's something we're preparing for, and something we take seriously, and we really care about the situation here, and it's something that it just breaks my heart seeing that that people, and I've met some people here in the U.S. who are from the Ukraine, and I'm talking to them again, and it's just surreal to be zooming into a war zone. Yeah. And everyone in Ukraine is really trying to help, no matter who they are. So it's really impressive.
I think it's great what you guys are doing, and I think this is an incredibly valuable tool that's being understated in the value that it can really bring to the Ukrainians. So Juan, thanks so much for coming to the studio. It's great.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Coming up, Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald, Tulsi Gabbard. They love to ask questions. They're just questions that they say aren't being answered about, in this case, secret Ukrainian bioweapons labs. Well, here's the good news. We have answers. But as the Russian government encourages state TV to use Tucker Carlson clips, I have a series of questions of my own. No, Tucker's not a Russian agent. I just have questions I feel are unanswered from them. That's coming up next.
Abrams live in association
on the economy, but that's never going to happen. Biden has never been particularly competent, but now he is also weak, frail, and a cognitive mess.
Little comfort to the people of Ukraine.
Forces, it's said to be continue to have been a training center for Ukrainian forces now, not by U.S. military any longer. Have you seen? What do you think the impact of an attack like that is? 35 people were killed, more than 100 were said to be wounded. It's probably the largest number of fatalities in one single strike.
It was a surprise to me, Anderson, truthfully. I've been at that base, Yavoriv, several times for training events where U.S., Ukrainian, Canadian, British, Germans, various NATO and non-NATO partners have come together, because it's not just that base camp where the missiles hit. There is a huge training area where Ukrainian forces maneuver in that area. It is not a big base. It doesn't have that many people or that many buildings. Surrounding the main base complex, which has relatively few buildings, are a lot of apartment complexes where Ukrainian families that are married to soldiers live. So it surprised me. I think it was sending a message, first of all, don't get comfortable anywhere in Ukraine. As General Clark said, it's a continuation of the terrorist activity, but it's also an attempt to potentially interfere with the refugee flow and perhaps some resupply actions into Ukraine from NATO countries, because it does straddle the Polish border. It's only about 20, as your reporters have said, less than 20 kilometers from the Polish border. So those were all the factors involved in this, but it also showed me something. Hitting that base with cruise missiles, with their caliber missiles, which are precision weapons, and hitting the building with precision weapons against a military target versus the area fire weapons that they're using against cities like Mariupol and Kharkiv and Kyiv, tells me that, as General Clark said, the terror approach to the citizenry is very different than the precision approach to the Ukrainian military.
And General Clark, I mean, we have seen just that continued just shelling of residential buildings. I mean, it becomes sort of, one becomes sort of numb to it just looking at these pictures, and you hear kind of the daily butcher bill of 2 people died in this residential building. But it's important to remember, these are, I mean, what we're seeing is a residential structure. You know, we saw that old man walking through a park, and you know, a rocket or some sort of artillery hit a building right nearby him. It's important to just keep your eyes looking at this each time with kind of fresh eyes to remind ourselves these are civilian structures.
It is terrifying what they're doing. If you're a civilian living in that town, you're hiding out in the basement, you're scavenging for food and water, your children are frightened to death, and you don't have any control over it. So it's a terrible situation for these people. But something else that General Hertling was pointing out, they do have precision weapons. If they could really target the defenses around Mariupol and knock out the defenses there, they probably would. They don't have the intelligence. They don't have the targeting system to go in after those things. And so what you have is the old Soviet model. You bring the tank up next to the apartment building and you blast it. They did this in Budapest in 1956. It's how they finished the Hungarian rebellion there in 1956. They brought in the tanks, they blew up buildings, they frightened and killed a lot of people. And that is the sort of Russian way of war. Grafting on top of that are these precision weapons, but you've got to have a targeting system for that. You've got to have an intelligence system that works on a real-time basis. And the only thing we've seen is this one strike really that's effective against this base, which had a bunch of people in it. I guess they were the people who have come across the border trying to help the Ukrainians. And I'm told that somebody posted a Facebook post or some kind of social media post and explained, hey, I'm in this wonderful base and look at all these people, they're all coming in to help us. And the Facebook post had the time and it had the location. And shortly thereafter, I guess the Russians intercepted it and put a missile strike in there with all these missiles. But for the most part, they don't have the targeting information. And Putin knows that the best way to finish this for Zelenskyy to lose heart and concede. And that's what's not going to happen.
You know, Anderson, if I might add to what General Clark said, you just asked Ambassador Yovanovitch about the training mission that occurred between the United States, Canada, and Germany with Ukraine. All of that took place at that base. It was called the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, JTMGU. So I believe that missile strike at Yavoriv was sending a signal. Do not partner with any NATO forces. Do not partner with the United States. That is, I think, just as important as what General Clark said in terms of hitting the civilians that are there. But it was, again, to reinforce a lack of intelligence. The buildings at that base are on a map. They're on satellite feeds. There was no military target hit other than the buildings. So this is something that's relatively easy for the Russians to get. They can hit buildings that are stationary. The problem is they can't hit military forces. They are having a hell of a time attacking against a very active defense by Ukrainian forces, and it's going to cause, I think, some significant problems in the next few days that might even contribute to a culmination, meaning an end of the Russian offensive operations and really them going into a defensive position. If that happens, they are really going to be in bad shape from a logistics and resupply capability.
General Hertling, one dynamic we heard about today was the Ukrainians' ability to change their air defenses almost on a daily basis. What is the significance of that?
Well, I think what they're able to do is... Anderson, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, General Hertling. General Clark, either one. General Clark, what
they are doing is, as we talked about earlier, in using Stinger missiles. Those are man-portable missiles. The individuals who are carrying those missiles can move around. They are hard to target. They have no radar signature like most air defense systems have, like the Russian air defense systems have. So you can shut down a larger system that has radars and rockets that are aiming at the higher levels. You can't shut down an individual soldier with a Stinger man-portable device over his shoulder. And I think as you're moving those forces around, they are getting intelligence feeds from some of the Ukrainian territorial forces that are seeing flight paths of helicopters and aircraft. And so they quickly reposition the individuals with the Stinger missiles to intercept those aircraft on flight paths that are repeatedly used, which also show just how ineffective the Russians are being in terms of understanding they've got to change their flight paths, not go down the same sorts of routes on more than one occasion. They're not doing that. So they're setting themselves up for air defense ambushes.
I'll tell you also,
go ahead, General Clark.
I was going to say also they're capturing some Russian equipment, and they've been very, very effective at conserving their own remaining air defense assets. So when you hear those missiles going out of Kyiv, those aren't Stingers. Those are, you know, things like Buks. These are the main missiles, and they've got them, and they've captured some other ones. And you know, the Russians are really the best source of equipment for the Ukrainian army in many cases. They're abandoning equipment; it's being taken over, and of course, the Ukrainians know how to use it. So they've done a remarkable job of hanging together their defense.
Yeah, General Clark, General Hertling, appreciate it. I'm sorry for the delay in stepping over you. Thank you both. Sadly tonight, in a country full of sadlies, there is more news from the city of Mariupol. It concerns a woman whose name we still don't know, but whose image at a bombed-out maternity has now been seen around the world. The pictures are tough to take, of course. The story is CNN's Phil Black as that, as well as hope. Here's his report.
We don't know this woman's name, but we can see the desperate effort to rescue her from the devastation of Mariupol's maternity hospital. She's hurt. There are terrible injuries down her right side. She is dazed by the enormous blast that hit here only moments before, but she's conscious and clearly concerned for her baby. At another medical facility, doctors worked to save them as their condition deteriorated. Surgeon Tima Mann, they tried to resuscitate the woman, also performing a cesarean delivery. They couldn't revive her or her child. They both died. Russian officials claimed the hospital was being used by Ukrainian troops, and all civilians had left before the attack. The evidence shows that's not true. Children, patients, staff all experienced the terrifying blast that created this crater. We do know this woman's name, Mariana Vcr. Hurt and bleeding, she walked through the chaos after the explosion. The next day, she gave birth in another hospital. She and her husband have named their daughter Veronica. The strike on Mariupol's maternity hospital has become a defining moment in a war already notorious for its brutality and great suffering inflicted on the innocent. Phil Black, CNN, London.
It's just horrific. Coming up next, there's breaking news on what would be an extraordinary high-level summit next week in Brussels. We'll have the latest on that. Busy day of high-stakes diplomacy today in Ukraine. We've got a live report from the State Department. We'll be joined as well by Fareed Zakaria. Later, also a report from Romania, where refugees, in their own words, about what they have left behind and what the future may hold.
I earned 3% cash back at drugs.
Delivering that message, and I think that's exactly why I said. And listen, Bill Maher's no fan of my father's. He's no fan of our families. But that's why he's saying this would have never happened under Donald Trump. And frankly, he's right. And I applaud the courage to say that.
Brain for a minute, because Joe Biden inherited energy independence, and for the first time in 75 years we achieved that, and we were a net exporter of energy. Now, your father, I played tape of him lecturing, getting right in the face of the head of NATO, telling them how stupid they were to be importing all of their energy from Russia. He sent a white flag to Angela Merkel, saying you might as well surrender now, basically handing over your destiny to Vladimir Putin by doing these multi-billion-dollar deals. How big a factor is that in all of this? Because I think it weakens all of NATO, all of our Western European allies, and there's no America or American president that's strong enough to lead right now.
My father's always had great intuition. He was 100% right with this. And listen, at $40 oil, Russia's not a great economic force, right? They're actually a very small economic force, right? The oil and gas make up the majority of their economy. Now, it makes Russia awfully strong when oil's at $130 on. It was at 40 under my father. It was at $40. So you're weakening Russia by doing that. You're also strengthening America by having oil and gas, because effectively like a tax. It's like, you know, it's like getting rid of a tax in this country. And my father realized that. It's one of the reasons he wanted the country to be energy independent. It's one of the reasons he was so insistent on taking oil and gas and exporting it to Europe, because there's that much less